Hello everyone. The Youth for Environment Education and Development Foundation presents the Radio and Youth Podcast. I am Priti Sakha, your host today. Today we will talk about disaster risk reduction, more specifically, the roles and engagement of youths in sectors of disaster risk reduction. In today's episode, we have two amazing guest speakers who have expertise and have worked in the sectors of disaster risk reduction for a long time now. Before we begin our conversation, let me introduce our guest speakers to you all. We have Ms. Jekulin Lipi. Jekulin is a disaster management professional who works on disaster risk reduction policy and programs. She is the MGCY regional focal point on disaster risk reduction and climate change. Currently a project manager and lead researcher for Project Asia Pacific researcher, practitioners, and policymakers in dialogue with children and youth, with Major Group for Children and Youth. In addition, she is a trained Indian classical dancer, fond of traveling and reading books during her leisure time. Likewise, our next guest speaker for the episode is Mr. Girinath Reddy. Girinath is a disaster management professional who teaches, conducts research, and takes actions to promote informed development and systemic risk reduction. His recent works include drafting of National Disaster Preparedness Guidelines for National Disaster Management Authority (NDMA), aimed to guide state governments in implementing disaster preparedness actions in line with India's 15th Finance Commission reports. He is an inquisitive individual who enjoys traveling, learning new things, and appreciates every life on earth. A warm welcome to the Radio and Youth Podcast to both of you, Jekulin and Girinath.
Thank you, Priti.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. Since we are talking about disaster risk reduction in today's episode, understanding disaster risk reduction is really very essential. It has just been a while for me understanding what is disaster risk reduction, though I have heard the term disaster risk reduction in my course book earlier. When I think of disaster risk reduction, I think about capacity building, robust infrastructures, and resilient communities. So the first thing that I want to know from both of you is, when was the first time you heard about disasters and disaster risk reduction? And also, what does disasters and disaster risk reduction mean to you?
Thank you, Priti. So if I have to respond to your question, first time I have heard the word disaster risk reduction per se in English during 2016 while I was doing my master's course in disaster management. And what had led me to take that course, because I'm an engineer, I was into software field and all. But it was 2015 Nepal earthquake. I was there for a trek. So somehow during the earthquake, I got due to some skills that I've learned for wilderness survival. That's how I helped myself along with other team members, the youth especially. And good to know that this program is targeting youth, focusing on youth. So that is where I understood for the first time, or even I have faced my first disaster of my life. So that is 2015 earthquake. And as you have told that critical infrastructure and all reminds you of a disaster, I would quickly break these words, disaster risk reduction, and what is the understanding not only of mine, of the whole sector that is working on this. So when we see each of these words, there is no one single meaning even in the academy or even at an implementation level. For example, when we see a lightning, it is not a disaster at national level in India, but there are few states that look at even lightning as a disaster, and few states doesn't consider snake bite as a disaster, but there are few states that consider even snake bite as disaster, so that the funds that are allocated for DRR can be used. And there is also no single definition on risk. So how do we define risk? There are various theories surrounding even the risk. So there are many perspectives from which this is understood. But working on research side and with academia, what I understood when we put all these three terms, disaster, risk and reduction terms together, what exactly that means to me is that we are trading with the ecosystem we live in. So our ecosystem involves the soil, the nature, the other people, the animals and all. So we live together and we trade something, right? And sometimes this has opportunities as well as risk. Risk is nothing but, if you have to speak in soft terms, the probability that there would be an unwanted consequence. So along with opportunity, there may be some unwanted consequences. And we speak about the last term reduction, how we are in control of that unwanted consequences. So are we trying to reduce them or are we trying to manage them? So that's all disaster risk reduction is to me. And what do I remember when I hear about this term is inequality, poverty, lack of conscious living. These are the things that really are the root drivers of disaster risk. So we have many root causes. It spreads across different domains altogether. Let it be the economic model on which the whole world or even your country or my country runs, defines who would stay poor and how the wealth is redistributed. So that is economic aspect. I'm just giving simple examples. And social aspect, let it be the caste or any other, even gender inequality. These all are the social fabric. And how we define and how we live would change the whole risk environment and who would face the most risk. So when we are speaking about unwanted consequences, there is also a term called vulnerability. Who are highly probable to face these unwanted consequences? If it is a generic risk, everyone has to face it equally. But we observe in disasters is that not every person faces that. So the probability that an unwanted consequences for certain family or a certain gender or a certain age group would be higher than other groups, right? And that is what is all vulnerability. And these are the few terms that I remember when I hear this term disaster risk reduction.
Okay. How about you, Jekulin? When was the first time you heard about disasters and disaster risk reduction, and what do you understand by those terms?
Thank you, Priti, for the question. So with the question, let me take you guys to my childhood, and maybe many of my friends who would listening to this podcast, and mostly from the developing countries would relate to this. So I belong to the state of Assam. So where we call it is a male river because Brahmaputra is a huge in terms of both breadth and length. And we are affected by flood each year. So my place is inundated, roads and bridges are affected. So it has been with me, the term disaster, for quite a long time. And then coming to the capital DRR, so I understood the literal meaning, the literatures around it when I was doing my master's in disaster management. So in all the work that we do, we term as a disaster as an event where the emergency response happens, when a community can respond to all by itself, where the external force has to provide relief, has to provide an emergency response. So that has been with us for decades. But now it has to come up to a level where we need a paradigm shift. So disaster, or I would say hazards, all cyclones, the floods, the earthquakes, are prevalent in our normal hydrometeorological phenomena. So reducing their risks would be holistic. It has to be interdisciplinary, integrated of multiple stakeholders, and where we provide space to all the stakeholders to work together. And most importantly, when disaster risk reduction comes to my mind, it's adaptation, more planned developmental processes, integration of, most importantly, sustainable development goals. And also, as Girinath mentioned earlier, so it's very important that we work on reducing the inequality, the poverty, addressing the most important, the vulnerable groups of the community.
Yeah, so as you guys mentioned, like disaster is nothing new for any one of us. Like every individual have faced a disaster, either that be the natural hazards or the man-made artificial incidents we face in our day-to-day lives. Similarly, there has also been different interpretations to the term of disaster risk reduction. Generally, we understand disaster risk reduction as a systematic approach of identifying, assessing, and reducing the risk of disasters. It is the process of protecting livelihoods and assets of communities and individuals from the impacts of hazards. So generally, when I go through certain documents and articles that I have read, I have seen that disaster risk reduction and disaster management have been used synonymously. They are used like an interchangeable term. So are they actually the same terms or they are different? What are your thoughts on this subject matter?
In my opinion, Priti, so if we look into the past, disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management, surely that can be used interchangeably. But there comes aspect of time here. So are we speaking about a pre-disaster phase or the during and the post phase? That's where these terms delineate from each other. And I would term that disaster risk reduction is a subset of disaster risk management. I'll try to give an example here. So when we look at the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, so it has 4 priority actions. And first is understanding risk. So first, when we understand risk, it means what would be the probability of unwanted consequence and how big can be those unwanted consequences, right? And we have an option before the event takes place. Should we even take up that kind of opportunity which brings these risks with it? For example, since we have panelists from India and Nepal, so I would put one of my studies on Gandak Basin between India and Nepal. So when we look at that, the barrage that was built, the idea was to reduce the risk of flooding. But however, if we look at current stage, actually the flooding incidents have increased due to that barrage. So here, when we speak about disaster risk reduction, it's like understanding what new risk comes. So should we at all take up that, or can we do something better so that the consequences or the probability of those consequences are reduced? And there is always a residual risk. Here residual risk is that no risk can be completely eliminated. For example, growing a lot of agriculture would help us to reduce the risk of food insecurity. But when we see transforming forests into agricultural land, especially in hilly areas, would also increase the risk of landslides. So this is how a system works. So a risk from one form can even change it to other form. So there is always a residual risk. There comes disaster risk management. So knowing this risk and this kind of consequences would exist, how are we going to prepare? Then there comes the during event. That's when we have early warning so that we inform our citizens that an event would be coming. And not all events comes with early warning. And second is, do we have safe evacuation shelters? How do we respond all together? Are the whole response forces trained enough? Do they have equipment that would be needed during that particular event? Do we have enough technology? Are the citizens aware how to act during an event? And after that, as you have told, livelihoods would be lost, infrastructure would be damaged, even lives would be lost during that event. So there is always a physical damage and losses at physical as well as mental health level, if we speak about human perspective. And how do we help the affected populations to recover? so that their livelihoods are on track and even they are physically as well as mentally healthy. And this becomes the disaster risk management effort. And let it be in terms of this exists in different forms. It's not only action, but sometimes it can be policies that would guide action. Like a policy after the earthquake in Nepal, that one has to build seismic resistant structures is a disaster risk management effort for future purposes. And here, when we are speaking about future, are we taking only one hazard into the picture, or are we considering multiple hazards? So when we are speaking about rebuilding earthquake-resistant houses, did we consider other hazards that are there in that area, like floods, etc.? So these all efforts come under disaster risk management. So DRR is a subset of disaster risk management. So it's like mitigation aspect, and from the preparedness, response and recovery, you can consider it as disaster risk management.
Okay. How about you, Jekulin? Like, what do you have to say about the terms of disaster risk reduction and disaster management? Are they same to you or they're different?
So the disaster term itself has come because there are hazards which are already prevalent and natural, but their impacts have been more enhanced due to the lot of unplanned human activities. So an even impact and lot of aspects of our day-to-day life. So this has been also been made more intense and frequent by climate change. So disaster risk management would be the implementation to decrease the effects of an event to both the events. This would come when we try to integrate disaster and climate action by protecting our wetlands. It's very important. We protect our forests, we protect our land. So, and then coming to the disaster risk reduction, so we tend to have to take very risk-informed programs for that. And that would include inclusivity, where we tend to include all these major stakeholders, children, youth, women, LGBTQ plus communities. And that would be more in the level of planning, policy, and preparedness in a holistic way. And so to both the term would be go in and out together, but there is a slight on and on difference. So we need to act very smartly when we say, and disaster risk management would be both pre and after the event. And other things which we need to focus very much is on planning and inclusivity.
Yeah, so the disaster risk management is the umbrella that uncovers disaster risk reduction and other different aspects of disasters and risk reduction factors. So generally these days the issues of disasters and disaster risk reduction have been raising up in different sectors. It has also been brought into tables of discussions in different areas like climate change and other aspects. Like disaster risk reduction is now not only a single dimensional subject, it is a multi-dimensional subject, it is a multi-sectoral topic. I have seen disaster risk reduction being brought on the topics of climate change adaptation and mitigations. Likewise, in the sectors of SDGs goals, like it comes under the SDG goal number 11, SDG goal number 9, and many others. So what do you have to say about the linkages of disaster risk reduction to the sectors of climate change and SDGs? And what are the other possible sectors to include disaster risk reduction under the topic, like as a thematic area or sub-sectoral areas under the topic? So what do you have to say on that?
Priti, I would ask myself a question working on this subject for quite a while and working with different stakeholders and different subjects, expertise in different subjects itself. So I would put which sector or which subject of knowledge is not related to climate change, sustainable development and disaster risk reduction would be my first point. Actually, every sector, even so distant as rocket science, currently if we look in current research in USA, what they are trying to do is how can we target the asteroids that may hit Earth? How can we deflect their path or even blast them off? So that's where even rocket science comes in. So it's not only for wars, but even for DRR efforts, the rocket science comes in, and we are using a lot of satellite technology to get real-time information. And that's altogether different field. And when we speak about a complete biological level, so the current pandemic is an example that biology also plays an important role. Evolution also plays an important role. And one other subject is neuroscience. When we are communicating risk with the general public, many wouldn't even take that seriously, if you have observed. So there is something one needs where sociology comes into picture. Why do people listen? Why do they don't listen? That's where the trust aspect, the governance aspect, everything comes in. And when we are trying to build robust infrastructure, civil engineering, architecture, everything comes in. And when we speak about an emergency operation center that is fully equipped, then we are speaking a lot about technology and communication. So here my response would be, this sector is not linked to the three topics that you have just quoted. And that's where I inherently see the challenge. If we see these three topics, climate change, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable development goals, are guided by three different agreements at an international level. And when we see even at local level, they are implemented very separately. But they are very interlinked that really you can't even delineate what comes under climate change or what comes under disaster risk reduction. That's so interlinked. So in that case, if I have to put a point, I would say that everything is interlinked. Even the way of our life is interlinked to achieving these agreements. So 2030, when we have to come up with new agreements, I would believe that we would come with such kind of agreements from local to international level, and we also have experts from different fields altogether. So every field of science, arts, even when we speak about the folk dances or the dramas, they play a big role in communicating risk. So here, when we are speaking to achieve all these three, in that case, every piece of science or the information that humanity has accumulated across the centuries is very useful.
Okay.
And that should be the way forward.
Okay, I totally agree that disaster risk reduction, SDGs, and climate change is no longer a separate issue. It is a multidimensional subject, an interlinked subject that is linked to each and every aspect. So I would like to ask Jekulin, like, if there is any sector that has left these issues unaddressed, like if there is any sectors that has not yet identified disaster risk reduction, climate change, and SDGs as their main agenda or one of their thematic areas of work. So what do you have to say on that?
I think integration of all the subjects will definitely help to achieve SDGs, disaster risk reduction. So, but I would like to just highlight a few very specific, maybe a line of sectors, because I have been associated with, to enhance like what could be a more role to play in this subject lines. But as Girinath has mentioned, so there is no any other subject we could think of which is not related to this, but maybe emphasizing on few. So with this more on climate crisis that we are facing, the intensity of all the hazards and the frequency has increased. So I would say like DRR and climate crisis has become best of friends. So till now they are the most integrated best of friends, so they have become now. So, but if we do not address them together, we would lose the progress that we have achieved so far in terms of development, in terms of the work that entire world is doing towards achieving sustainable development goals. So I would give an example here is, so if you see during the pandemic, there is loss of livelihood. So there are many children who are dropping out of schools. And the main thing, the pandemic has affected the health sector very importantly. So the progress that we have done just because of one global pandemic, the achievement that we have achieved has come down drastically. So this has to be worked hand in hand, integrating all the three, so that all the investment, all the achievement that we have done should not come back to square zero. And we need to treat the best friends together. And plus, we also need to integrate into developmental sector, because developmental working in silos and not focusing on risk reduction and not focusing on the climate crisis would not work for us. And plus, here to mention, we need to also integrate science subjects and also social science subjects. So here I could give an example of anthropology and sociology. So sociology tries to understand the society, what is going on. And right now we are also very much speaking about creating a resilient society. So which is very important that we understand what is going on in the society. And the second thing is, again, coming with the resilient perspective, we have also seen like many examples, and also I have been reading many papers on it where the resilience of a community declines with time. It has to be multiple factors, but looking at from the lenses of anthropology, we also have to understand that the society is constantly changing, both before the disaster, during a disaster, and after the disaster. So, but that resilience has to shift and also has to be continuously flow so that the impact could be reduced. So it's not that we integrate just these subjects which I'm speaking about, but these are few of the line which I'm working to give an example to understand. Like there are many scope for all the subjects to come together and work towards this.
Thank you, Jekulin, for the point. From this, I get a point that she has mentioned different subjects like even anthropology, even from paleontology, we can understand several things. So since we are speaking about the sector, so one question we have to ask ourselves is, without which functionality in our society can we live happily? For example, I would take an example of education and health. Can we function or live to the best if there is no proper education or no proper health care? So these are just two sectors. For example, during an earthquake, there are a lot of schools that are damaged or collapsed in earthquake, and during I have been working in Bihar to study the floods in the Gandak River Basin. What I understood is that for 2 or 3 months, or so it depends on the monsoon, and that school in the particular village, the vulnerability community I was working with, their children wouldn't go to school because the school is flooded. So if you look into future, due to the current impact on education of those particular children that go to that particular school, we can predict what would be the employability or many other aspects. So what opportunities would these children would have in future compared to other children who have 365 days access to school, like the online learning or offline. At least they have those, but there are different children who doesn't have. The same is with healthcare too. So we have to even think about every sector that makes our lives happy is very important and is very essential part of DRR. If there is some sector, even if losing complete functionality of a sector doesn't affect us, then it means that it is a less important sector. But overall, every sector that we currently have built are very essential. Let it be for recreational purpose or survival purpose.
Yeah, so you guys are absolutely right that the components of DRR, the climate change or SDGs are taken to be as an integral part of each and every sector. They are not to be left behind, like one is taken and the other one is separated. Something like that is not to be happen. Like each and every component is to be aligned and taken into priorities, and the strategies are also to be built accordingly. So when we talk about, like we have been talking much on disasters in disaster risk reduction. Generally, when we talk about disasters or any hazards, we generally realize about the natural extreme events only, like the flood, the cyclones, the drought, the earthquakes, the natural ones only. So, but these days, the disasters or the risks that we have been facing are not much of the natural ones. Though some regions are facing the natural ones as well, mostly the disasters we are facing, they're found to be like the human-induced or human-caused ones. There are different disasters like the conflicts, like the other issues like the pollution or other different factors like the climate change itself is a big disaster that the human has introduced into our surroundings. These disasters, these natural ones or the human-induced ones are the disasters that are growing day by day, and they are seen to be increasing to be more prominent and more severe these days due to much of the human activities and human behaviors. So what do you see in the upcoming future? Like, how do you visualize the impacts of these disasters in the days ahead, or what is the picture that comes to your head when you see this situation getting worse day by day?
Priti, if we look into the typology of hazards, so we have geological hazards, hydrological hazards, meteorological hazards, etc. So there is one other sub-typology that has popped up, and when you are speaking about future, what I look in is this, and that is NATEC, natural technological hazards. So when we speak about this, these are complex hazards. For example, a lightning strike on something. So these I'm speaking about real-time stories. So a lightning striking a petroleum reserve tank, something like that. So imagine that is a natural hazard, lightning, but somehow storing of fuel is something technology related. So when a natural event could exacerbate the technological hazard, so already there is a risk of leakages of these chemicals and all, on which we are working, thinking that it may be due to faulty devices, but there may be some events. How much of a care we take, sometimes it may happen that the natural events would lead to technological hazard. So during my first semester, me and Jekulin have been to Daman and Diu for our internship program, and that is a union territory in India. And what we went to study there is that a flood event had flooded a factory where there is a chemical which reacts very violently with water, not only contaminating the water, but also it would lead to kind of blast or some other chemicals, lead to poisonous gases. And these examples we are seeing right now, frequency of such kind of events has increased. It's not only directly technological hazard, but natural hazards are causing these technological hazards. So that's where a complex disaster comes in, one event leading to other unwanted events. So here we are not even speaking about the consequences. So other events trigger. So there is a triggering event that would trigger other events which would have further consequences. And those consequences are not going to be simple when we consider it for individual hazards. So here we are dealing with two hazards. So something like following COVID-19 protocols in evacuation shelter where there is a cyclone. The challenge is going to be high. It's going to be much more challenging when there is no flooding. It's very easy to follow COVID-19 protocols or the guidelines, etc. But when there is an extra event that is added like flood, so the whole planning may go for a toss until if it is very agile, adaptable, and one has complete control over that event, what is happening, a whole knowledge. So that's how what I see in future is that these kind of events would increase if we really don't work on the disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management aspect after understanding risk. That's the reason I always see that first priority of Chandai framework, understand risk. So how can the risk be? So the risk can be of different types and the causal factors and consequences would be very different. So are we prepared for everything that we can imagine? And there are always consequences that we didn't even imagine. One example is like plastic, which is a great invention when it came. But right now we are really working on to solve that problem. right?
Right.
So it wasn't expected that it would lead to this. So something that is what our future could be.
Okay, like the disasters are obviously like in comparison to the past, the disasters we experience today is much more severe and adverse than that of the past. So, Jacqueline, what do you have to say about this? Like, if we compare the natural disasters and the man-made disasters on a beam balance, which would weigh higher according to you? Like, will the man-made disasters be extreme, or the natural disasters we have will grow much extreme in the future? What do you have to say on that?
So I would say like no disasters are natural anymore. So
Right.
all the haphazard planning, too much of encroachment to the floodplains, staying very close to a volcano maybe, or maybe staying very close, which we already know the river shift its course. So we don't tend to be say like the disasters are natural, but there are little scope where we can work more on in this sector. And there has been a lot of the things that we have done, but here there are a lot of new stuff, or we can say there are a lot of gaps where we need to understand and work on. So we need to rely on the 4 priority of action which Sendai framework has provided us. So if nobody has worked on it, so this could be the start base of working on it, the 4 priority of action. And plus, needless to say, we do put a lot of effort still on the event response, which we call it as emergency response, and also decreasing the mortality rate, which are very important. But we need to also work more on building continuous resilience, and then capacity building, and also not recovery. We need to focus on green recovery now, protecting our forest, and also using those natural resources that we have, wetlands, we have forest, as a natural defense to this hazard. And most importantly, which we need to focus on to reduce the vulnerabilities, is by reducing the poverty and then unemployment, and also giving them proper health facilities. So as the same line goes, we already discussed in the previous question of yours, like connecting DRR and sustainable development goals. So this has to be integrated so that we don't lose out what has been achieved, and we move forward with as day passes by. And plus, but not losing hope, we have achieved a lot, but yet a lot has to be done, and especially in the developing countries, because we have lack of resources. So even though the development has been achieved, again a disaster strike, it's a full stop. We go back to the square zero. That shouldn't happen. The development has to be go continuously. And plus, we need to also focus on reducing the risk. So there comes the 4 priority of action for sustainable development goals.
I would deny with one point of Jacqueline, that is we have less resources. That is where I would bring in my point that I've spoken for previous question when I was speaking about poverty inequality. So is the real problem is that we have less resources, or is that we have an inefficient distribution system where the resources are not shared in an equitable manner? That's where when the risk is equal, everyone has to face it equal because of the lack of access, and that is where the whole disaster research has started. When we look into before 1970s, it was always thought that disasters are natural events. That is what the Western discourse was all about. But later, during 1970s, they understood that it is only certain countries, even for small magnitude events, where the developed countries could, where there is no much loss. But even for small events in developing countries or underdeveloped countries, the losses and damages are very huge. Only then they understood that it is not, disasters actually are not natural events, only the hazards are natural, and what we do about it is all in our hands. and that is all about the governance. How the resources are accessed and how do we plan if the resources are limited. So it is a global problem as well as a local problem, and that's where the root causes come in. And that's where everyone has to think where these root causes are linked. For example, why those underdeveloped countries are underdeveloped. When we look in, there comes the story of colonization, which we literally forgot, right? So one has to look in so that one feels responsible to share those resources which one has consumed in past. So that's where the resources have to be shared where there is need. Only then we could achieve that, or else as Jekulin told that we have achieved a lot, and there is a long way to go. I would say we haven't achieved a lot at all, but we have created a lot of problems. So it's going to be a big journey that we have to take, and it's going to be a journey that should be a mandate kind. Because without every citizen in this world acting for the problems that either we directly or our foreparents or even my parents have created or your parents have created, somehow we have to address all them. We can't really put everything on them who don't exist or who exist or who are old and who can't act right now, right? So the problem is big. We can't really speak always positive, telling, we have achieved a good, and there's a long way to go. That is not going to solve the problem. I'll tell the reason here. Because we have a lot of deniers. For example, the ex-US President Donald Trump is one of the biggest climate change deniers. And there are many citizens who don't even see this as a problem. So can we go in the same way, or really, and there is a lot of research that is portraying that even the lot of global temperature data on global warming, we use satellite data for that. And now there is new research or a challenge that has popped up telling that did we underestimate the actual risk? Already did we tip off the point? So still research is going on those aspects where people are telling there is a time, if we don't act right now, we would tip that point in 2 years, come say 2050, and 2100 is going to predict it to be very worse. But there are other researchers also using their small research who could predict that already we may have crossed those tipping points. So it is not that tomorrow we act, but already we are late. So we have to act right now.
Yeah, so it's absolutely true. We cannot deny the fact that how severe the disasters have grown in comparison to that of the past. And it is obviously growing much and more severe these days because of the human actions and activities that we have been doing. It's not only, like you said, it's not only the forefathers who created this problem. We, the generations of today, are also equally contributing to excavate these problems and accelerate the impacts of these problems that we are facing these days. So it is quite essential now. And as I said, it's going to be too late if we don't start today. So it's quite essential now that we start taking actions against the rising disasters and plan for better livelihood and livelihood options and creating better opportunities for oneself to live a better life, not only for ourselves, but also for the generations that are coming behind us. So there is a lot more things to do, but we cannot be hopeless about that also. But since we are doing certain levels from ourselves, the other helping hands are also much essential in this context to overcome these growing challenges. So as we are talking more on the importance of disaster risk reduction, can you highlight some of the points, like why really is disaster risk reduction essential in our day-to-day livelihoods or in the sectors of other different sectors of our works or of our studies and many others? So what do you have to say on the importance of disaster risk reduction?
In my belief, Priti, disaster risk reduction, if we put simply, it is a way of life. So when we are speaking about the sector, so the whole responsibility should be delegated to everyone. Let it be office bearers and as well as citizens. For example, when I'm in my school, I'm even an engineer. So as part of engineering, I would have to create different projects to get my degree. So had I known about disaster risk reduction or even risk then, so the kind of innovation or research that or the new products that I would build is going to be way more informed. So it would solve the problem rather than creating problems, because currently there are a lot of innovations that are coming up which may create risk for future generations. So one thing at an individual level, understanding education, so it should be part of not only education curriculum but at home also, or the choices that we make. For example, I have two products. One is produced in a sustainable manner but costs 3 times more than a product that is produced low wages, where the workers don't even know about what are human rights, what are labor laws in their country or across the world, endorsed by international labor organization, something like that. So when they are not aware, so at least we have to be aware, and we have to make such kind of lifestyle choices where we slowly move into sustainability. So everything that we buy or that we want, how we use it, are we going to reuse it, recycle it? So everything, it's a process. So as long as we are in that process, it becomes a way of life. There is no separate thing that a sector, humanitarian sector should exist. Right. Because when everyone is enough informed, enough aware, and enough capacitated to deal with the things, then I see this sector diverging to be where every citizen is part of it. So there is no formal organization that exists, but every citizen takes up their responsibility to do what is needed at that moment. And even a disaster risk reduction, we speak about two kinds of risk. One is prospective, that may happen, and one is already the risks that are existing. So our choices, everything has to be in such a way that we are not only reducing the past risk that we are currently facing, but also our action should be in a way that we don't create new risks, so that the next generation also spares all the time in reducing these risks instead of enjoying that life on earth, I would say.
Yeah, so absolutely right. Like, disaster risk adoption is not only to be included in the course books or the strategy development plans, rather it should be included in day-to-day livelihoods of the people, day-to-day lifestyles and habits of the people as well. So Jekulin, what do you have to say on the importance of disaster risk reduction?
So disaster risk reduction, I think it has to be ingrained in everyone's way of action. But however, to achieve that, so there has to be a holding hand or maybe a guiding force which could help to leverage and reach to that point. As we mentioned, it has to be ingrained in the educational system, but still we see, as in our previous report by Guardian of the Planet, so the children have a tendency to learn about the disasters and climate action through social media itself, but we don't put that in their school or college syllabus. So that is very important. Like, we build a base from their schooling itself. So there comes the importance of the sector itself, which could pull a hand and show a way to achieve that. And plus, it's also important, like, we do our risk-informed decisions programs or projects, where it's not that we do something and then leave it to the community for it, even there is any after effects or any consequences. It has to be very risk-informed. Going with the citizen science is very important in that. And plus, it's very important, like, we groom it with the base of life. As we say, the sustainable lifestyle should be the way each person leads a life. Plus, here comes also one important thing is we can't expect each of the person to be the same way. As we say, like, we should live a sustainable life, we should not waste water, we should not waste food. So there has to be a someone who should show our way towards it. So that would be mine on that. But it's very important, like we do realize that this is one sector which has come up and we need to focus on it. But it's also important that there has to be someone who's also hold the hand and work. We can hand in hand work towards it.
Yeah, so absolutely right that disaster risk reduction is to be brought on the limelight now. It's high time. It's not only a matter of table discussions or a matter of course books only now. The practical actions and activities are also to be built in order to combat these rising disasters and the risk that we are facing in our day-to-day life. It is quite evident now that you guys have been working in the sectors of disaster risk reduction and have a lot of experience on this. So as you have been working in this sector for so long time now, I'm sure that it has not been easy for both of you. And as the name implies, there might have been different risks and challenges on the way that you have overcome or that you have faced. So what are the major challenges you have faced while working in this sector?
So the sector itself actually has to work more on it because as you know, like not many people know about it. There's also a sector which is called disaster management. We do tend it to be a normal subject or maybe a subject of more like a civil engineering because we tend to focus more on infrastructure. But more awareness has to be built, like it's not a subject of just one major subject, but it has to be come up to an integrated level, interdisciplinary level. So making aware that also there is a sector which needs to work on and there is a lot of scope in the sector. And plus as this comes under the awareness. So and then coming to the next would be, although there has to be a lot of funding to this project. So even though there are, but there has lot to more finance support needs to be done in terms of integration, in terms of bringing all the disciplines together, wanting to in a holistic way to respond to all the vulnerabilities that exist. And giving to that also, we need to come up with a lot of innovations. We can't just keep moving on with the same preparedness response and then reducing the mortality. So we have to be innovative in responding to both disasters and the climate crisis, as the best friends always stay together. And also the most important, the challenge thing which I see is bringing the youth, children, the women, the LGBTQ plus communities in an equal platform with the decision makers and bringing them all in the same table for a discussion. So that is very important. Like we give them a voice, we give them a platform, which we do try to, and MGCY has been trying to give a platform to engage youth, women, children in a UN system. But there are more which to be done, and more has to be, messages should go to the all the last mile of the communities. So they understand that they have a platform and they can come forward and they could say their voice in front of the dominant voices. And lastly, I would say like focusing on the human rights. So we don't tend to sometimes see that when a disaster is affected, also there have been impact on the human rights. So it's very important. And also I will try to bring one another aspect of it, as you mentioned about conflicts earlier. So conflicts has lot many effects, like it leads to migration. The climate change has also lead to lot many migration. So this is one thing which also needs to be ingrained into it. And we see there's a lot of human rights violation issues when there are migrations, because people don't get at least the basic things in the place where they have migrated. So these are the things which we need to be aware of. And as you said, we need to start working on it now.
Yeah. How about you, Girinath? What do you have to say about this? Like the challenges that you face?
Challenges, sure, because Jekulin has shown one side of the coin. I'll speak on the other side of the coin in this particular sector. So if I have to put it in one word, the sector is very beautiful and very useful and need of the hour. But if I look in how the agencies, organizations or the office bearers are acting on these particular guidelines, really all they call from me is pity, because actually when I have worked with different organizations, let it be NGOs, academia, universities of two countries, even at India level, UK level, and I've even worked at UN level. So what I've observed is actually these organizations knowingly or unknowingly are perpetuating the vulnerability. So the same old way of working is not going to work, and many organizations are not agile to adapt. So if we look in, many organizations are still concentrating on relief. Let me put it very frankly. As a youth, as a young adult, how I see myself is that I understood a lot of things, though I don't have as much experience as older people who are heading different organizations. But if we look in, actually those people could have been problem perpetuators when they were youth too, and they are following the same mindset, not even allowing youth to take the control, though using this platform we build that the leadership of youth, children have to be built up. I'll give one example. So Fridays for Future is one amazing movement of children and youth for a sustainable future. And there are countries like even my country where those organizations would be shut down. So they would be asked to shut down because at the end what they are working for is right. But it creates friction with entities that are actually creating this problem. And here we are speaking about NGOs as well as governments or even citizens. Our fellow citizens are not even ready to change. So the effects of the youth, children, adults, or even the elderly, the old age, and who don't exist right now. Several efforts have been put and we are not recognizing the importance of those efforts. Only when everyone understands the importance of this subject, then only we can really address this problem. Or else that's going to be a lot of friction. That's why a lot of NGOs are asked to shut down, and we are facing it at global scale. And are we really funding those kind of innovations that would address these problems? Is the funding enough? So that would be the first point of mine if I have to put in. So when we have funding methods of different funders, are they funding the right problem at the right scale? Are they? Because at the end, one of my friends recently have approached me asking, do you want to be part of a proposal for a small grant? So I asked, how much amount is it? $5,000 US. That would roughly amount to 3.5 lakhs in Indian rupees. And what is the duration of project? That is 1 year. So if I literally split the 3.5 lakhs into 12 months, that is 30,000 per month. So how does a team can function in that 30,000 per month? Can they get their salaries? Can they really do an impactful work? But at the end of the day, these organizations write beautiful reports. And I have seen so many reports, which I literally believe that is not the reality on ground. Actually, if we go onto the ground and if we really check, did they create any impact? No. Most of the money goes into admin expenses. There is a little money that is really reaching the public. So there are several challenges in this field, which I don't want to cover up. And yeah, I have faced different challenges, but it's a beautiful field. That's the reason I'm enjoying working in this field. And challenges come, and that's how we act, we show the leadership, we show the expertise, and even guide the other people who don't understand this problem, so that we all together address this problem from local to global level, together as one humanity and one life on earth.
Right, absolutely. Like there is no any place where there are no problems or no challenges. Without any challenges, I think it would be not much interesting like it is now for you guys to work. So, as you have mentioned about the challenges and the problems that you have been facing, how do you think that these challenges can be overcome, or how you guys have overcome the challenges that you are facing?
From my side, I would say either I quit that organization or I speak out.
Right.
Yeah, so that depends on what kind of organization and what kind of people exit. Do they have a proper work culture? Because I've seen several organizations where, though they are working in this sector, they don't respect the human rights of their employees. Because
Right.
those employees, when I'm a consultant and friendly, they come and speak very openly to me what exactly how they treat and all. And in that way, there exist those kind of organizations. But how youth should bring a new culture is that whatever we are trying to convey to people, first take it as a pilot, and whenever there is an even Wi-Fi, so it can make itself the organization first sustainable, so that it would be a pilot place where people come and look in what one is preaching. Or other way it could be listen how I handle, I listen and I come up with a decent scientific quote researchers, I quote studies, I quote my experiences to give them a larger perspective, how they are wrong or how things can be done better. And there are many people who didn't even listen to that. For example, during COVID, one precaution for COVID-19 is that wash your hands with soap. And when we see it in India, and I'm assuming same is the summer time in Nepal, the March, April, May time where we had our first wave. And there are many places in the country which faced drought during the same time. So with asking them to wash their hands who don't have water to drink is going to work? Or should we think about another approach that would suit that particular context? So here the contextual understanding becomes very important, and that's what I do. So how do I overcome the challenges is I put those kind of points after understanding the context in which the program should be implemented, only after understanding the context. And that comes with empathy. We have to even understand because always I believe in do no harm. If you can't do good, it's better to stay at home rather than going out and doing some harm to the affected or to be affected population.
Yeah, absolutely right. We all have our own ways to tackle with the challenges. So better understanding of the matters and realizing the importance of the scenario and making a good effort to overcome the challenge is the most in each and every situation. So how about you, Jekulin? Like how have you overcome, or how do you plan to overcome the challenges or the problems that you have mentioned?
Being in a young person in this sector, so I very much relate to the youth perspective. So MGCY do help to bring the children and youth in a platform to engage them in the UN sector, UN system altogether. And we worked on policy and advocacy, capacity building, knowledge and action. So this space is to engage them in a more proper way to seek what they actually want for their future, what could be the most relevant policy that would affect them for their better future. So this voices needs to be heard, as I mentioned previously, so that the whole system is not ruled by the dominant voices. It should be by the people, for the people, so that they create their own future by themselves. And also, maybe there's one point which I would really like to highlight is we couldn't change the entire challenges in just one day or in just few years. We need to continuously work on it. We need to continuously push for it. We need to be very strong in what exactly we want, and we need to be pushed for that. Our voices are heard in the discussion table. Those are actually done on ground. So we couldn't work in silos, like just resigning or maybe not going with it. We need to work along with the system so that slowly we worked with them to bring a change. So this we have to work continuously, and here we want our enthusiasm and our continuous effort.
Yeah, absolutely true that we are supposed to put continuous effort to overcome these challenges and bring the changes in the system that is prevalent in our societies, in our communities, and in our nation at the moment, so that we overcome these challenges very soon. Like as you mentioned about the participation of youths in the sectors, in these sectors, we have seen that in different sectors there has been the engagement of youths, either that be directly or indirectly, either that be in a large group of youths or a small group of youth only. Youth have been engaged in different sectors, in different areas, in many different ways. But there are also times when youths are not included in the groups and they are not considered significant in the groups. Like their voices are generally undermined by the voices of the older generations, you can say like that. So what do you have to say about the young people working in the sectors of disaster risk reduction? Can disaster risk reduction be a sector of work for the upcoming generation or not? Like how do you see the possibility or the engagement of youths in the sectors of disaster risk reduction?
Priti, when we speak about the future of youth in this sector, so I would say when we see different groups, everyone has responsibility, but when we see at the whole energy levels, it is youth who carry new ideas, new energies and all. For example, even it was the youth of Nepal who have inspired me to join my course in disaster management, because I have seen the efforts during response, the efforts of youth. So one way is during event, the other way is youth, let it be way of life or even businesses. So when you are speaking about what could be best opportunities, so there are multiple businesses that are creating problem or perpetuating the problem that is exacerbating this particular disaster risk. There could be organizations that, or even businesses or products that can be innovated by the youth using their new knowledge. Because what I've learned in engineering a decade ago, the knowledge has changed completely. So they are very versed with the current knowledge, and that is where they can form businesses where they can reduce the risk. So when we are speaking at that perspective, they can even be part of businesses when they want to do it very passively. It's a way of life. They want to do actively in the sector, they can come into the sector and be the change we want to see. So it's all about, we call for change makers. So, and even I have worked with UNICEF. So that's what children and youth are very important. That's the reason even a agency exists for children and youth under United Nations. That's where they can think, first understand what is going on around, what are the problems. So one can join organizations that are working to address these problems, or one can be innovative to come up with products and do business that would reduce this risk. So there are multiple opportunities for the youth thanks to their energies and the new knowledge that they are carrying.
Yeah, so absolutely right. Like the young people, young change makers are also to be brought in the sectors of disaster risk reductions for much more energetic and much more energy to overcome this challenge. So how about you, Jekulin? What are your thoughts on young people working in the sectors of disaster risk reduction? And can this sector be a possible job for the upcoming generation or not?
Yes, I think that's a very important question. So youth participation in this sector is very vital. So I will also bring in here disaster risk reduction and the youth engagement in climate action. So youth are doing marvelous work in adaptation and in protecting our planet. So there are a lot of, you see a lot of youth entities where has been working on the ground, creating sustainable lifestyle, working on organic farming. So youth, as we all know, are very enthusiastic and work towards innovation. So youth engagement, I would like to say they have different perspective to the future they want. And although we tend to say them as, oh, you are just 17 years old or you're just 13 years old, you don't have enough experience. But I would say, given a chance, given a platform, they could create miracles with their ideas, with their innovations. So that is very important that we give them a chance to it and encourage them for their participation. So here I would like to say we need to encourage, connect, and do the capacity building of them so that they continuously engage in disasters and climate action. So here, coming to it, I think I should also mention about the upcoming report and the policy brief that is coming up in the MGCY website. So stay tuned. So we will be releasing it soon, and this is the entire project which is led by youth, done by youth from the 13 different countries of this region. And coming to the career perspective, there are a lot of scope with the career perspective because now the focus is on the projects and the initiatives and innovations which are led by youth, started by youth. So there are a lot of scope, but you need to keep very vigilant. You need to keep engaging. You need to have an open mind of creating something very new, very innovative. So there is way to go, and there is a lot of scope in this way.
Yeah,
like this particular sentence of Jekulin, we should encourage connect. And I highly agree with it. And I guess that is where YFeed or UNMCGY should target different approaches, like even University Connect, College Connect. So something where the new innovators, or when we are speaking about youth, there is also adolescents that they have crossed to come to youth age. So we have to target even at adolescents when they are in universities, go connect, make them understand the whole global issues so that they can use their knowledge, innovation and energies to create new things and then lead us into life.
Yeah, so absolutely right that youths are the young change makers are to be brought in the limelight of disaster risk reduction as well. Generally, we have heard that the children and youth are the first generation who are experiencing the adverse impact of the changing climate. They are the ones who are most affected due to the impacts of disasters. They are the ones who are hit at the first and the hardest due to the disasters. They are experiencing the disproportionate impacts of disasters in day-to-day life, more specifically in the children and youth from the group of minorities, the group of indigenous community, the ones living under poverty, and many others. So if we go on talking about this, it's quite distressing to see how children and youths are being impacted due to these disasters and changing climate. So since we are talking about the participation of youth in the sectors of disaster risk reductions are to be encouraged in the upcoming days, what do you think can be done to encourage the participation of youth in these sectors? Why do you think if you have to highlight, like, why is the engagement of youth essential in the sectors of disaster risk reduction? What will that be?
On the how do we encourage youth and how they can contribute for this problem, Priti, one thing I have already covered. First thing is engaging, and second thing is connecting. Where we have different youth groups formed in different universities, different communities. The social media is so powerful now, where virtually people can connect. So let's say is a youth group in village A, which is doing certain kind of work, and in city B, there is another youth group that is doing other kind of work, and they can form even a virtual social media platform, and they can convey different ideas so that it would work. That's how even the youth feels connected. That's how social network is one important aspect we study in disaster research. And that's how even social networks could be built. And that's how I've seen even during Nepal earthquake or any other disaster, how one uses their mobile phone to get relief or training the youth. So so establishing that structure is the first important thing. Second thing is how do we train them? So if we train them in relief response and recovery operations, So it means that they have taken the whole leadership at a local level. And when we see at the age group, children and adolescents, it would be tough for them to learn this higher aspect. And we go to elderly age and adult age, they have less energies. So they have seen a lot of life. They have less energies to really act upon or contribute. But when they come to this age group of youth, high energies and their learnability is very high. Even research suggests that it is at that age where the whole learning curve peaks. After that, the learning curve in general decreases. So that is where we train the youth after they form the group, so that they know what they can do even if there is no external support and all. A disaster, when we see what is the definition of a disaster, it is when local community runs out of resources and they would need resources from outside community, right? So we have to help the youth to use the funds. Even at local governance, there are funds that are dispersed using thanks to the democracies we have in both the countries. So how better can that funds be managed? And how better can people act together? So that's what youth can do. And I sincerely believe that only youth can do that. So I call you to come forward to understand exactly what are the global issues, form a network, get themselves trained and help their communities to achieve the fullest that they can achieve.
Absolutely true that the young people are to be encouraged and brought in the front lines to work with you people in the sectors of disaster risk reduction. But still, if we see the present scenario, I see that still only a few youths are only engaged in the sectors of disaster risk reduction. Still, we need a larger group of young people to be connected and to be working in the sectors of disaster. So what is to be done that there is much more participation of the youths, and the youths are to understand about the disaster risk reduction? Jekulin, what do you have to say on this? Like, how are they to be encouraged to work in the sectors of disaster risk reductions in the upcoming days?
Yeah, Priti. So with this, I think giving them more awareness from the school itself is very important. Like, as we see our the snow in the Himalayas are melting, so it should not melt the future of the youth. So it's very important we bring the awareness. And the second is we need to bring solidarity between all the youth entities. As Girinath said, maybe from the village youth group could connect to the city youth group. So which should happen when we bring a solidarity between all the youth groups and they work together in jointly in collaboration. And plus, it's very important that each group share the knowledge. So as we know, like today, the air pollution is not a natural problem. It has become an international problem, which goes beyond the international boundaries. So it's very important, like we keep sharing the knowledge so that we learn from each other and work towards the risk reduction and climate action.
You guys seem to be eagerly waiting to work with the upcoming new generation and the young change makers in the sectors of disaster risk reduction. Obviously, there are several lots of efforts to be made to engage much more youth in the sectors of disaster risk reduction. Disaster risk reduction is now not only to be included in the papers or the policies and the strategies, but rather in the course book of each and every students who are studying in the schools, colleges, and universities, so that they come over to join hands in the sectors of disaster risk reduction. So as you have worked in the sectors of disaster risk reduction and gathered so much of experiences and stories working in these sectors, both at nationals, locals, and regional levels, are there any some of your incidents or memories that you would like to share while working in the sectors of disasters? Like any noteworthy or some unpleasant incident that you would like to share with us?
If I have to take this question, Priti, though I have discussed the challenges in my previous point, I have to tell that it has been amazing. So I can't even pinpoint one experience. So I'm still in this sector, other sector, and has got a pleasant experience daily. because at the end it gives me a great feeling that I'm understanding some problem in depth and I'm trying to solve that particular problem using available ways or new ways. So that always gives me pleasure every day, day in, day out. So in that way, so every day is great experience to me working in this sector.
Yeah. How about you, Jekulin? Like any remarkable day or any bad day that you had working in the sectors of disaster risk reduction till date?
Also, I think as we are talking about the enthusiasm and their youth idea about challenging the current system and taking up innovative ways, I think Girinath's answer has given an example, like he does enjoy like addressing those underlying problems which disasters and climate actions has brought up. So this is in one example I think we should be happy to share with our listeners that maybe an unpleasant incident or anything, but maybe my thoughts on it would be we should more focus on treating disaster as an holistic way, not just an emergency event, which would be we need to focus on the paradigm shift for a more risk-informed decision making and risk reduction. So this would be my idea of if I say this has to be worked more. So this thought comes to my mind when I think of it.
Yeah, so there is no any doubt that the beautiful environment of disaster risk reduction that you both have been working is the career that you have chosen for oneself, and there is no doubt that you have been doing great job and giving your own contributions to make a beautiful environment not only for you, not only for me, but for everyone living around us and living behind, the ones coming behind us as well. So as you said, this sector is not a new sector, but the ones that had just come into limelight and is further to be prioritized in each and every sector. It is to be taken in a holistic manner. It is to be taken as an integral part of each and every sector. It is not to be undermined as a thematic area or sub-thematic area by other different ongoing environmental topics. So with this, we are at the end of today's episode of our podcast. It was great hearing from both of you. Once again, thank you, Jekulin and Girinath, for joining us today. We hope that you had a great time sharing your experience as we had a great time hearing from both of you.
Thank you, Priti. Pleasure is mine always.
Thank you, Priti, for this wonderful experience.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I hope that you guys, along with me, our listeners are also having a great time listening to this episode of our podcast. We will be back with our next podcast very shortly. Till then, stay safe, start acting green. Bye-bye. Keep listening to Radio and Youth Podcast.